During the ministry of Jesus, he performed more than 40 miracles. These were events that defied nature and were beyond the capabilities of humanity. He healed the sick, he raised people from the dead, he fed 5,000, and even calmed disturbances in nature. Matthew, Mark, and Luke tell of a miracle Jesus performed on his way to perform another miracle. On his way to the home of Jairus, who had a very ill daughter, the one Jesus shortly thereafter raised from the dead, another miracle was taking place. It is the miracle of the woman with the issue of blood. So much is going on. It was a bit of a chaotic time with crowds pressing in around Jesus. Mark 5 tells us a woman in the crowd had suffered for 12 years with constant bleeding. She had suffered a great deal. She went to many doctors over the years, and she spent everything she had to pay them. But she had gotten no better. In fact, she was worse. She had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. For she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. Immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. Jesus realized at once that healing power had gone out from him, so he turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my robe?" His disciples said to him, "Look at the crowd pressing in around you. How can you ask, 'Who touched me?'" But he kept on looking around to see who had done it. Then the frightened woman, trembling at the realization of what had happened to her, came and fell to her knees in front of him and told him what she had done. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over." Here we read of a story of a woman who was willing to do anything she could to push her way to Jesus to find healing. Why did she need healing? What kind of life did this woman have? First, let's talk about her life and then the reaction of Jesus. She was a woman who had been suffering from issues of blood for 12 years. 12 years of constant bleeding. This was not just difficult, but had tremendous implications for her life. She had been to doctor after doctor, spending all her income to try and find an answer, to find no healing at all. None came. In fact, instead of getting better, she grew worse. We do not have the exact medical diagnosis for this woman, other than it was an issue with blood. But what kind of implications would this have on her life? The answer is many, and none are good. Her continual bleeding would have rendered her ceremonially unclean. She would have been known in Jewish law as a nidah, or menstruating woman. As a woman with continual bleeding, she would have had to been clean and clear of blood for 7 days to regain her cleanliness, her purity. Instead, she lived in a perpetual state of uncleanliness. What did this mean for her? It meant that she was isolated from everyone, both socially and religiously. It likely meant that she was likely unmarried, and if she was, it could be grounds for divorce. She was an outcast, but not by her own doing. It was because of something that was happening to her and not something she could control. All she wanted was to be clean, to live a normal life, and to interact in the religious life of her time. Leviticus 15 tells us, when a woman has a discharge and the discharge in her body is blood, she shall be in her menstrual impurity for 7 days, and whoever touches her shall be unclean until the evening. This meant further isolation for this woman. Not only was she unclean, but anyone who she touched or who touched her would also be unclean. She was totally isolated and totally alone. Can you imagine being unclean for 12 years? She can touch no one. If she did have family, she could not prepare them food or clean the home. It is as if she were dead to the world. And she had a last hope, and his name was Jesus. As Mark 5 tells us, she had heard about Jesus, so she came up behind him through the crowd and touched his robe. for she thought to herself, if I can just touch his robe, I will be healed. And immediately the bleeding stopped, and she could feel in her body that she had been healed of her terrible condition. But what was she risking to do this? Not that the text says there was a crowd. She was risking a huge risk, knowing that if she touched others, they would become unclean. Further, how dare she touch Jesus and make him unclean? Instead, she touched the hem of his garment. She looked at Jesus as one who he said he was, the Messiah. The Messiah carries healing for those who believe. Knowing this, she weaved her way through the crowd, and she touched what? She touched the hem. Why? This was not just a string hanging down from the garment Jesus was wearing. It was intentionally placed for a good reason. Numbers 15 tells us, the Lord said to Moses, speak to the people of Israel and tell them to make tassels on the corners of their garments throughout their generations, and to put a cord of blue on the tassel of each corner. And it shall be a tassel for you to look at and remember all the commandments of the Lord, and to do them, not to follow after your own heart and your own eyes, which you are inclined to. So you shall remember and do all my commandments, and be holy to your God. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I am the Lord your God. This is the tassel Jesus had hanging from his robe. Its intention is a reminder to keep the laws of God, to be obedient in all circumstances. The word hem is translated as tzitzit in Hebrew, meaning tassel. It reminded the wearer of their personal relationship with God. It reminded them to whom they belonged, and also what was expected of them. Today, we have the Holy Spirit encouraging and reminding us of our personal relationship with God. This tzitzit, this tassel, is what the woman with the issue of blood reached for, and she touched it, and she was healed. And Jesus said, who touched my robe? This was not a woman who would remain nameless. Jesus realized that healing power had gone out of him. The frightened woman realized she had been healed, and she approached Jesus, fell to her knees, and told him she was the one. She was the one who had touched the fringes of his garment. And what did Jesus say? Did he react and recoil after an unclean woman was near to him? She undoubtedly touched others in the crowd as well. She was risking a great deal for her, Jesus, and others. Yet his reply was this, and he said to her, daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace. Your suffering is over. Your suffering is over. Nothing was going to keep this woman from getting to Jesus. She had faith in his messiahship. She was willing to sacrifice scorn, abuse, and let's be honest, making others and even Jesus unclean by her actions. But forget it. She fought through the crowds because she was willing to do whatever she could. And the response of Jesus is hopeful, amazing, and wonderful. Your suffering is over. It makes me wonder, what am I willing to sacrifice to get to Jesus? So what are you willing to sacrifice to get to Jesus? Are we willing to do anything we can? Will we fight our way through crowds, fear, suffering, scorn, to hear that your faith is great? The woman, now without the issue of blood, approached Jesus boldly. She sought Jesus as the Messiah in faith, believed and received not just healing, but life. She received hope. Her bold actions and belief made her well. It recalls to mind the verse from Matthew 7, verse 7, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and the door will be open to you. God allows, in fact, tells us to be persistent. God is open and willing to be found by us. Therefore, we can approach him with bold, audacious faith, knowing that he will always open the door for us, just as he did in so many ways to the woman with the issue of blood.